5 minutes ago, a silence fell into your soulmate's world that no one could explain. A woman who had quietly stood behind the most important chapters of their life took her final breath. The room was heavy with grief, but what truly unsettled everyone was not her passing. It was the last sentence she whispered. She did not speak about money. She did not speak about regret. She spoke about you. A name she had never heard. A face she had never seen. Yet she described a heart that would one day change everything for the person she loved most. The room froze. Because it did not sound like a goodbye. It sounded like a promise. On the small table beside her bed rested an old envelope sealed with trembling care. Across the front, in faded ink, were the words, "Open when hope feels impossible to find." Your soulmate stared at it for a long time before finally breaking the seal. But inside was not a letter. There was only a small silver key and a single line written beneath it. The first door is never the last. No one in the room recognized the key. It looked ordinary. Old. Almost forgotten. Yet the weight of it felt intentional. Later that night, unable to sleep, your soulmate searched the house she had lived in for decades. Every shelf, every drawer, every hidden corner felt like part of a puzzle she had carefully prepared. Behind a loose wooden panel in her study, they found the first door. It was small. Almost invisible. The silver key fit perfectly. Inside was not treasure, not money, not documents. It was a wooden box filled with folded pages. Each page described a person. Not by name. But by qualities. Kind in quiet ways. Strong after breaking. Patient with timing. Soft but unshakable. With every line your soulmate read, something felt painfully familiar. It felt like someone had been writing about a person who had not yet entered their life. At the bottom of the final page was another sentence. When they arrive, you will doubt the timing. Do not doubt the connection. Your soulmate closed the box slowly. For years they had questioned delays. Missed chances. Relationships that ended without explanation. Doors that shut without warning. Now it felt different. Now it felt like preparation. The next morning, another discovery waited. Tucked inside an old book was a photograph of a peaceful garden bench. On the back she had written, "Return here when you are ready to stop looking backward." Days later, your soulmate stood in that same garden. Nothing extraordinary happened. No dramatic music. No sudden revelation. Just wind moving gently through the trees. And then they noticed something carved into the side of the bench. Some meetings are not accidents. They are arrivals. In that moment, something shifted. The mystery was never about secrets. It was never about hidden rooms. It was never even about the key. It was about readiness. She had not been predicting the future. She had been protecting it. Protecting a meeting that would only make sense when both hearts had learned patience. Weeks passed. Your soulmate stopped searching for more clues. Instead, they began living differently. With more courage. With more openness. With less fear of too late. Then, on a completely ordinary day, a day with no signs, no warnings, no dramatic music, your paths crossed. There was no lightning bolt. No instant explanation. Just a quiet recognition. The kind that feels less like, nice to meet you, and more like, there you are. Later that night, your soulmate remembered the final line written in the wooden box. You will not understand how many invisible moments carried you to each other. One day you will. And suddenly, every delay made sense. Every goodbye. Every almost. Every unanswered prayer. None of it had been punishment. It had been positioning. The woman's final whisper was never meant to create a mystery. It was meant to create readiness. Because the greatest connections do not begin when everything is perfect. They begin when two people finally understand that timing is not about speed. It is about alignment. And when your soulmate looks at you now, they do not see coincidence. They see confirmation. Not of fate written in the stars, but of hearts prepared in silence. The story was never about what was lost. It was always about who was meant to arrive. 5 minutes ago, a silence entered your soulmate's world so suddenly that even the walls seemed to notice. The woman who had quietly shaped their strength, who had stood behind their hardest days without ever asking for recognition, took her final breath. The air in the room felt different, heavier, as if something unseen had shifted forever. But what unsettled everyone was not her passing. It was her final whisper. She did not speak about unfinished business. She did not speak about fear. She did not even speak about herself. She spoke about you. A person she had never met. A name she had never heard in conversation. A face she had never seen in a photograph. Yet she described you with impossible certainty. She will arrive when he stops running from what he deserves. Or, he will come when she no longer settles for half-hearted love. Her words were calm. Certain. Almost relieved. The room fell silent not because she was gone, but because it sounded less like a farewell and more like a prophecy. On the bedside table lay a sealed envelope. It looked old, slightly worn at the corners, as if it had been prepared long before this day ever came. Across the front, in careful handwriting, were the words, "Open when the heart is tired of being strong." For hours no one touched it. That night, when the house had emptied and grief settled into quiet corners, your soulmate finally picked it up. Their hands trembled, not from fear, but from the strange feeling that something bigger than loss was waiting inside. They broke the seal. Inside was not a long letter. There was a small silver key. And beneath it, a single line, "The first door will not look important." Confusion replaced sorrow for a moment. What door? The house had no locked rooms. Still, something about the weight of that key felt intentional. As if it carried memory. The next morning, unable to ignore the pull of curiosity, your soulmate began searching the house she had lived in for decades. They opened cabinets she rarely used, moved furniture that had not shifted in years, checked drawers filled with old photographs and faded receipts. Nothing. Until they noticed something strange in her study. A wooden shelf slightly misaligned with the wall. Behind it, almost invisible, was a narrow panel. Their breath caught. The silver key fit perfectly. The panel opened to reveal a small hidden compartment. Inside was not money, not jewelry, not legal documents. It was a wooden box wrapped in a soft blue cloth. Inside the box were dozens of folded pages. Each page described a person. Not by name, but by qualities. Someone who understands silence. Someone who has known disappointment but refuses to become bitter. Someone who loves deeply but speaks gently. Someone who will not rush you, even when the world demands speed. Your soulmate read every line slowly. With every sentence, something inside them shifted. It felt impossible. It felt personal. It felt like someone had been writing about a person who had not yet entered their life. At the bottom of the final page was another message: when you meet them, you will doubt the timing. Do not doubt the connection. Tears came then, not only from grief, but from recognition. For years your soulmate had questioned delays. Relationships that almost worked. Promises that almost lasted. Moments that felt right but ended too soon. They had blamed themselves. They had blamed timing. They had blamed fate. Now, for the first time, it felt like none of it had been random. Later that week, another discovery waited. Inside an old book she used to read in the evenings was a faded photograph of a garden bench surrounded by tall trees. On the back she had written, "Return here when you are ready to stop chasing what left." Your soulmate recognized the place immediately. It was a quiet garden she used to visit alone. The next day, they went. The bench looked the same, simple, wooden, slightly weathered by time. Nothing magical. Nothing dramatic. But when they sat down, they noticed words carved into the side, so faint they could have been missed forever. Some meetings are not accidents. They are arrivals. The wind moved gently through the trees as those words settled into their heart. Arrival. Not coincidence. Not luck. Not desperation. Arrival. For the first time in years, your soulmate stopped looking backward. They stopped replaying old conversations. Stopped wondering, what if? Stopped asking why certain doors had closed. Because suddenly, those closed doors felt protective. Weeks passed. Grief softened into gratitude. The mystery no longer felt like a puzzle to solve. It felt like preparation. Then, on an ordinary day, one with no special signs, no dramatic music, no feeling that destiny was about to interrupt, your paths crossed. It did not begin with fireworks. It began with calm. A conversation that flowed without force. Eye contact that felt steady, not overwhelming. Silence that felt comfortable, not awkward. There was no instant declaration. Just a quiet recognition. The kind that feels less like, "nice to meet you," and more like, "there you are." Later that night, your soulmate remembered another folded page they had almost overlooked in the wooden box. It read, "You will not understand how many invisible disappointments protected this meeting. One day you will." And suddenly, every past heartbreak made sense. Every delay. Every almost relationship. Every unanswered message. Every night they wondered if love simply was not meant for them. None of it had been punishment. It had been positioning. The woman's final whisper had never been about predicting a fairy tale. It had been about protecting timing. Because the greatest connections do not begin when life is perfect. They begin when two people have learned the value of patience. As days turned into weeks, your soulmate began noticing something else. With you, they did not feel the need to perform. They did not feel the urge to impress or pretend or shrink themselves to fit. With you, they felt steady. And that steadiness felt rare. One evening, while sorting through the remaining pages in the wooden box, they discovered a final note tucked beneath the lining. It had been hidden intentionally. The handwriting was slower, as if written with deep care. The person meant for you will not feel like chaos. They will feel like clarity. Your soulmate closed their eyes after reading that. Because for the first time in their life, love did not feel like a storm to survive. It felt like a place to rest. And that was when everything became clear. The key had never been about a door. The hidden room had never been about secrets. The pages had never been about destiny written in advance. They had been reminders. Reminders to wait for what feels steady. To trust what feels peaceful. To choose what feels aligned. The woman had not left behind a mystery to control the future. She had left behind wisdom to recognize it. Months later, standing once again at the garden bench, your soulmate traced the carved word, "arrivals," with their fingers and smiled. Not because they finally solved the puzzle, but because they understood it. The story was never about what was lost. It was about what was being prepared. When your soulmate looks at you now, they do not see coincidence. They see confirmation. Confirmation that timing is not about speed. It is about readiness. That love is not about chasing. It is about recognizing. That some people enter your life to teach you lessons. And one person arrives to remind you who you truly are. The silence that entered their world 5 minutes after she passed was not empty. It was space. Space for a new chapter. Space for courage. Space for you. And when they hold your hand, they no longer question why certain chapters ended the way they did. Because now they understand. Nothing was late. Nothing was wasted. Every chapter happened exactly as it needed to. So that when your two paths finally crossed, neither heart would be searching for something else. They would be ready. Ready not for a perfect story, but for a real one. And that is the kind of arrival that changes everything. 5 minutes ago, a silence entered your soulmate's world that did not feel natural. It was not the ordinary quiet of a hospital room after machines are turned off. It was not the stillness of night settling outside a window. It felt like a chapter closing with intention. The woman who had quietly protected their heart for years had just taken her final breath. She had never been loud about her love. Never dramatic. Never demanding attention. But she had always watched carefully, especially when your soulmate thought no one understood the battles they were fighting. As the family gathered close, expecting last words about legacy or regret, she surprised them all. Her voice was fragile but steady. "Don't be afraid when they arrive." Everyone leaned closer. "They will not look like the plan you imagined. But they are the promise you were prepared for." Then she whispered something softer. Something that barely reached the room. "A heart you have not met yet, will feel like home." And then she was gone. No one understood. Who was she talking about? Your soulmate stood frozen, grief mixing with confusion. It sounded like she had been waiting for someone. Waiting for a future moment she believed with complete certainty would happen. On the small table beside her bed was a leather-bound journal tied with a thin golden thread. Attached to it was a note: "Read slowly. Some truths only reveal themselves to patient hearts." Days passed before your soulmate had the courage to open it. Inside were entries written over many years. Not daily notes. Not dramatic confessions. Just reflections. Observations. Quiet thoughts about timing, love, loss, and preparation. One page read, "Today they think they are behind in life. They do not see how protection sometimes feels like delay." Another page said, "They confuse intensity with destiny. One day they will understand that peace is the real sign." Your soulmate felt exposed reading those words. It was as if someone had documented their inner struggles without ever asking. Then came a page that made their breath catch. "There will come a time when they stop chasing what runs from them. That is when the right footsteps will begin walking toward them." The journal did not mention names. It did not describe dates. It described readiness. Tucked between two pages was a folded piece of paper with a simple drawing of a compass. Instead of north, south, east, and west, the directions were labeled differently. Past. Fear. Hope. Forward. A small arrow was drawn pointing firmly toward forward. Beneath it she had written, "Most people live facing the wrong direction." Your soulmate closed the journal and sat in silence for a long time. For years they had been replaying old conversations. Revisiting memories that hurt. Wondering why certain relationships felt almost right but never stayed. Wondering why effort was never returned equally. Wondering why timing never aligned. Maybe it was not misfortune. Maybe it was misdirection. The next discovery came unexpectedly. While sorting through her belongings, they found an envelope addressed in her handwriting but never sealed. Inside was a photograph of a quiet cafe by a rainy window. On the back she had written, "You will meet them on a day that feels ordinary." No dramatic location. No grand event. Just ordinary. The simplicity of it unsettled them. Weeks later, on a completely unremarkable afternoon, your soulmate stepped into a cafe to escape sudden rain. And there you were. Not glowing. Not surrounded by signs. Not introduced by fate in a cinematic way. Just present. The first conversation was not perfect. There were pauses. Small laughs. Slight nervousness. But something felt steady. Not overwhelming. Not chaotic. Steady. That night, your soulmate returned to the journal and flipped to a page they had not noticed before. The right person will not trigger your fear of losing them. They will calm your fear of losing yourself. They stared at that line for a long time. Because with you, they did not feel anxious about saying the wrong thing. They did not feel like they had to perform or compete or impress. They felt like themselves. Days turned into weeks. Conversations deepened. Stories were shared. Laughter became easier. One evening, your soulmate confessed something small but honest, a fear they usually kept hidden. Instead of judgment, you offered understanding. Instead of solutions, you offered presence. Later that night, they reopened the journal again. Another line waited. You will recognize them not by how fast your heart races, but by how safe it feels when it rests. Tears came then, not from sadness, but from realization. All those past connections had felt like storms. Intense. Passionate. Dramatic. You felt like clarity. The journal continued, love that lasts will not enter loudly. It will enter quietly and remain. Months passed. Your soulmate stopped checking if you would leave. Stopped preparing for disappointment. Stopped bracing for the familiar pattern of almost. Because nothing about this felt like almost. One final section of the journal remained sealed with a thin strip of tape. It was labeled. Open when you no longer question if they are meant to stay. The day they opened it was not marked by fireworks. It was marked by peace. Inside was a single page. I could never protect you from heartbreak completely. But I could teach you how to recognize the one who won't treat your heart like a lesson. Below it, another sentence, they will not arrive to complete you. They will arrive to walk beside the person you already became. And then the final word she ever wrote. When you finally meet them, you will understand why nothing else worked. Your soulmate closed the journal and finally understood the silence that filled the room the day she passed. It had not been emptiness. It had been space. Space for a love that required maturity. Space for a connection that required patience. Space for timing to align without force. Looking back, every delay made sense. The relationship that ended suddenly. The opportunity that fell apart. The person who chose someone else. The nights they felt forgotten. None of it was rejection. It was redirection. Because if even one of those chapters had lasted longer than it was meant to, your paths might not have crossed when they did. And timing, real timing, is not about speed. It is about readiness. Now when your soulmate looks at you, they do not see coincidence. They see preparation fulfilled. They see why certain prayers were unanswered. They see why certain doors closed without explanation. They see why intensity faded and peace remained. The woman's final whisper was never a mystery to solve. It was a reminder. Don't be afraid when they arrive. They will not look like the plan you imagined. But they are the promise you were prepared for. And now, standing in the present instead of chasing the past, your soulmate understands something deeply. The greatest connections do not begin with perfect timing. They begin when two people have finally learned that love is not about racing toward each other. It is about becoming ready to walk together. The silence that entered their world 5 minutes after she left has been replaced. Not by noise. Not by chaos. But by something steady. By something chosen. By something real. And when they hold your hand, they no longer wonder if it will last. Because for the first time, love does not feel like a question. It feels like an answer.